Ever get that, like, weird feeling on an escalator? You know that, like, little flutter in your stomach when the stairs start moving under you?
Yeah, yeah,
It's like a tiny roller coaster you didn't sign up for.
totally. It's that strange feeling of moving while you're just standing still.
Right. For most people, it's just a quick whoa moment, but imagine that feeling like magnified, like someone just cranked the volume way up on those
Oh,
sensations.
yeah.
That's what it can be like for a lot of autistic people, and it can turn a normal escalator ride into this huge anxiety-filled thing, even a phobia.
Exactly. It's called Escalaphobia. And in this deep dive, we're going to break down why this, like, everyday thing can be so overwhelming for someone on the autism spectrum. We're mainly looking at this article, Autistic Fears, Escalators, from Cheap ABA.
Perfect. So let's get into it. The article talks about sensory overload as a big factor. Makes sense, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You've got the constant motion, the noises from the machine, maybe flickering lights above.
Right, it's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, it's like your senses are just getting bombarded from everywhere and there's no off switch. But what's interesting is the article says the sensory overload can be even more intense for someone with autism.
Yeah, and that's because a lot of autistic people have what they call heightened sensory sensitivities. So imagine those feelings, but like amplified. What might be a little annoying to us could be really, really distressing for them.
Wow, yeah, that puts it into perspective. So it's not just about each individual sensation, but how strong they are.
Right. And it's not even just about how strong the sensations are, but the fact that the escalator moves in this kind of unpredictable way can be a big trigger too. It's about something called proprioception, which is basically how our brain understands where our body is in space.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's like when you step off a boat onto land and you still feel a bit wobbly even though you're not moving anymore.
Yes, exactly. And for people um, who have differences in how they process that proprioceptive information, which is common in autism, that escalator movement can feel really unpredictable, unsettling, even disorienting.
So you've got the sensory overload, this unpredictable movement.
Right.
I can see that would make someone anxious.
And then, of course, you've got the fear of falling, which the article also mentions. That's something a lot of people feel to a certain degree.
Right.
But for someone with autism, the height of the escalator and that feeling of being stuck in motion could make that fear way worse.
Especially if they've had a bad experience on one before. Like if they stumbled or felt unsteady, that memory could really stick with them.
Oh, yeah.
And we can't forget about social anxiety either. I
Right.
mean, crowded escalators can be a lot for anyone, right?
Oh,
You're
yeah.
crammed in with strangers. You're supposed to stand on a certain side.
Right, right.
Maybe someone bumps into you. All of that can be super overwhelming socially, especially for people with autism who might find it harder to deal with those social cues.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like all these different anxieties just hitting at once. The sensory stuff, the fear of falling, the social pressure. No wonder escalators can be so tough.
It's a lot.
So what can you do about it? The article does have some hopeful stuff, right? Like practical strategies to deal with escalaphobia.
It does. And one of the best approaches is this idea of gradual exposure. The idea is to help the person get more comfortable with escalators at their own pace in a safe and controlled environment.
So instead of just throwing them into the deep end.
Yeah, yeah, like baby steps.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. How do you even start to, like, introduce someone to an escalator, especially if they're really afraid? It's not like you can just make it less scary.
That's a great question. It really shows how important it is to find an approach that works for that specific person. There's no one solution that works for everyone.
So how do you start? What's, like, step one?
Well, you could start by just like observing the escalator from a distance.
No,
Let the
yeah.
person watch how it moves, listen to the sounds, but without actually having to get on.
So kind of like desensitizing, getting used to it from afar.
Yeah, exactly. And you gradually get a little closer over time. Maybe
Yeah.
you stand closer, touch the handrail, then eventually take a few steps on it while it's not moving.
Okay, so they're slowly getting familiar with it, seeing that it's not this scary, unpredictable thing.
Right.
You're introducing it in a safe way.
Exactly. And it's really important to remember to do this at the person's own pace, with someone they trust there to support them. Patience is key.
Definitely. No rushing this. You talked about sensory tools before. Could those help with this gradual exposure?
Oh, for sure. Like, if the noise is a big problem, noise-canceling headphones with some calming music or even nature sounds can really help. It's like creating their own little sound bubble.
Oh, I like that. A little island of calm.
Yeah.
What about the visual part? I bet all that motion and the lights could be really disorienting.
Yeah, you're right. Visual stuff can be a big deal too. Sunglasses can help tone down the brightness, especially in places with harsh lighting, or even just focusing on something still in the distance while they're on the escalator. That can help with disorientation.
So many great tips. And I guess it's all about finding what works for that individual, right? Because everyone's different when it comes to sensory stuff.
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another. So it's about trying things out, finding the right combination of strategies. Now, in addition to gradual exposure and sensory tools, the article also talks about something called cognitive behavioral therapy.
CBT.
Yeah.
I've heard of it. I'll be honest, I don't really know what it is. What's the basic idea? How does it work for something like Escalaphobia?
So CBT is based on this idea that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all linked together.
Okay.
So with escalaphobia, you might have a thought like, this escalator's going to break.
Yeah.
And that triggers anxiety, which makes you avoid escalators completely.
Like a chain reaction.
Exactly. CBT can help you break that chain by teaching people how to recognize and challenge those negative thoughts. So in this case, a therapist might work with someone to challenge that thought, like, is there actually any proof the escalator is going to break? And replace it with a more balanced thought like, escalators are actually really safe, statistically speaking.
So you're basically reframing how you think, challenging those anxious thoughts with, like, logic and facts.
Yes, exactly. And over time, with practice,
Yeah.
that can really help lessen the anxiety and lead to more positive behaviors.
It's like you're teaching your brain to react differently.
Yeah.
So it's not fear running the show anymore. You're taking back control.
I like that.
Yeah.
And on top of that, CBT can also give people actual tools to deal with anxiety in the moment.
Okay, like what? Spill the beans.
Right.
What can someone actually do when they feel that escalator panic hitting?
Well, deep breathing exercises are super classic, and for good reason.
Right.
Focusing on those slow, deep breaths, it can really help calm your whole system down. Stops that anxiety from spiraling.
It's like hitting the reset button on your brain's panic mode.
Exactly. And then there's mindfulness exercises.
Okay.
Like, instead of letting your thoughts go crazy with worries, you zero in on your senses.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see, hear, feel, just in that moment?
Bringing yourself back to the here and now?
Yeah.
I can see how that would be grounding, especially when a situation feels overwhelming.
Keeps you in the present so you don't get swept up in all those what-if fears.
This has been eye-opening. It's crazy how much there is to think about with something as, like, basic as riding an escalator.
Right. It really shows how something that might seem small to some people can be a huge obstacle for others. And I think the biggest takeaway here is that escalaphobia, it can be managed.
Okay.
With the right strategies and support, it doesn't have to control your life.
Exactly. And even for people who aren't autistic, this deep dive has some really helpful stuff. I mean, everyone's had a weird escalator moment.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
We've all been there.
For sure. And those CBT techniques, challenging negative thoughts, the breathing, the mindfulness, those can be used for all kinds of anxieties, not just this.
So if you're someone who avoids escalators like crazy, you're not alone. There are things you can do to get past this.
Right.
It might take time, some effort, but the payoff is huge.
Yeah.
Just imagine being able to, go through the world with more confidence and freedom. That's what this is all about.
Totally. It's about giving people the power to live their lives to the fullest, escalators and all.
And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into Escalaphobia. We hope this episode gave you some new ways of looking at things and some practical tips for braving those moving stairs. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.